The sky bled. Not with the soft hues of dusk, but with a wound, a rent in the heavens through which fire and smoke poured like lifeblood. Seren, crouched in the shadow of a crumbling wall, felt the tremor before he heard it. A sound like a mountain weeping, low and guttural, rolled across the ash-choked fields. He pressed his back against the cold stone, fingers digging into the mortar as the ground shuddered again. The blight had eaten the crops, the village of ash had become a hollow shell of fear, and now the sky itself was falling. He saw it then, a shape, vast and dark, tumbling from the rift. Wings torn, scales like shattered obsidian, a serpentine form that twisted in agony as it plummeted. It crashed beyond the eastern ridge, sending a plume of dust and debris into the air. The impact shook the earth, and for a moment, the world went silent. Seren's heart hammered. He was a failed squire, cast out for lacking the spark, the innate magic that every knight of the realm was supposed to wield. He had no power, no purpose, only the shame of his disgrace. But something in that crash called to him. He ran. Not with the grace of a trained soldier, but with the desperate, clumsy speed of a boy who had nothing left to lose. The ruins of an old watchtower loomed ahead, half collapsed, its stones blackened by time. The dragon lay in the crater it had carved, a mountain of flesh and broken bone. Steam hissed from its wounds, and its breath came in ragged, wheezing gasps. Blood, dark and thick, pooled beneath it, soaking into the thirsty earth. Seren stopped at the rim of the crater, staring at the creature. It was magnificent and terrible, a relic of an age that had all but forgotten it. The dragon's eye opened, a single, molten orb, slit with pain, and fixed on Seren. The boy felt a jolt, like a spark of static in his chest. The beast's voice, when it came, was not a roar but a whisper, ancient and dry as parchment. You have no spark. I see it. The emptiness in you. Seren flinched, but he did not run. I am Ember-Vane, the dragon continued, each word a labor. The last of my kind. And I am dying. Seren's throat tightened. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice cracking. The dragon's eye flickered, and a faint, bitter laugh escaped its jaws. I want to live. And I want the world to live. But I cannot do it alone. My wings are broken, my flame is ash. Yet there is a way, a pact, old as the first fire. You would bind yourself to me, share my blood, my breath. In return, you would gain the power to consume the essence of my kin, the drakes, the wyrms, the hydras that still crawl in the dark places. Each one you devour would restore a thread of magic to this fading world. But it would cost me. Each consumption would drain my life, bring me closer to the final dark. Seren stared at the dragon, at the ruin of its body, at the desperate hope in its eye. He thought of the village, of the children with hollow cheeks, of the priests who had branded him a failure. He thought of his own emptiness, the void where magic should have been. Why me? He asked. Because you are nothing, Ember-Vane said, and so you have nothing to lose. But you have a heart that still beats. That is enough. The dragon extended a claw, trembling, and touched Seren's chest. A searing heat shot through him, not painful but electric, as if a dormant nerve had been awakened. The world tilted, colors sharpened, and for the first time, Seren felt the pulse of something beyond himself, a connection, thin as a spider's thread, but unbreakable. The spark he had never possessed ignited in his core, a tiny, flickering flame. He gasped, falling to his knees, and Ember-Vane's voice echoed in his mind, no longer just sound but thought. It is done. You are bound to me now, Seren. The first kill will be your rebirth, and my first step toward death. Seren looked up, tears blurring his vision. I don't know if I can do this. The dragon's eye softened, something almost like warmth in its depths. You will learn. But we must move. There are those who would see us both dead, the Inquisition, the zealots who burn what they cannot understand. And there is a hydra, not far from here, that guards a pool of corrupted magic. If you take its essence, you will grow stronger. And the world will breathe again. Seren nodded, wiping his face with a grimy sleeve. He rose, feeling the new weight of the bond, the presence of Ember-Vane at the edge of his thoughts. The sky above was still torn, but the fire had faded to a dull glow. He looked at the dragon, at the ruin of its body, and made a silent vow. He would not let this last hope die. He would hunt, and he would consume, and he would find a way to save them both, or he would die trying. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of smoke and rot, and Seren turned to face the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, the hydra waited. And with it, the first taste of power. The dawn came grey and cold, the sky a bruised canvas of weeping clouds. Seren stood at the edge of the crater where Ember-Vane had fallen, the dragon's scales a dull, cracked mosaic of rust and ash. The wind carried the scent of wet stone and dying grass, and beneath it, something else, a faint, acrid tang that made Seren's newly awakened senses prickle. "It is close," Ember-Vane said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through Seren's chest. The dragon's great head rested on his foreclaws, one eye milky with age, the other a burning ember that watched the horizon. "The drake has made its lair in the dried artery of the world. I can feel it, a parasite feeding on the last drops of magic." Seren nodded, his hand strained to the hilt of the broken practice sword at his belt. It was a pitiful weapon, notched and dull, but it was all he had. The Inquisition had taken his real blade when they cast him out, along with his name and his honor. Now he was nothing but a ghost in a ragged tunic, following a dying dragon into the unknown. "How do I find it?" he asked, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "You do not find it. You feel it." Ember-Vane's eye closed, and a shudder ran through his massive frame. "The pact binds us. My pain is your compass. Follow the ache in your chest, the burn behind your ribs. That is the drake's presence, and it grows stronger as you near its den." Seren closed his eyes and tried to listen. At first, there was nothing, just the wind and the distant cry of a bird. Then, faintly, he felt it, a dull throb, like a bruise pressed too hard, centered just below his sternum. It pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, a slow, patient beat that seemed to call to him. "I feel it," he whispered, and the words felt like a vow. "Then go. I will remain here and conserve what little strength I have. But know this, Seren, the drake is not like the tales. It is a creature of hunger and rage, twisted by the fading magic. It will not hesitate, and it will not show mercy. You must be swift, and you must be clever." Seren turned away, the weight of the dragon's words pressing on him like a stone. He had never been swift or clever. He had been the squire who tripped over his own feet, who forgot his oaths, who failed the trials. But the spark inside him, the one Ember-Vane had kindled, burned with a fierce, stubborn light. It was not much, but it was his. He set out across the moor, his boots sinking into the soft, wet earth. The grass was brittle and yellow, streaked with veins of black that spread like disease. Every few steps, he passed a withered tree, its branches twisted into claws that seemed to reach for him. The air grew colder, and the throb in his chest grew stronger, until it was a constant, gnawing ache. By midday, he found the ley line. It was a scar in the earth, a trench that ran for miles in either direction, its walls cracked and dry. Once, it must have been a river of power, a conduit of pure magic that fed the land and its creatures. Now it was a hollow, lifeless wound, the stones at its bottom blackened and brittle. At its center, a gaping maw led into darkness, the drake's lair. Seren crouched at the edge, his breath misting in the cold. He could smell the creature now, a reek of sulfur and rot, so thick it made his eyes water. He listened, and heard the slow, rhythmic scrape of claws on stone, the wet sound of something breathing. "It's in there," he murmured. "But it's not coming out." He needed to draw it out. He needed to make it come to him, where he had a chance. His mind raced, recalling the old tales, the strategies his trainers had tried to beat into him. But those lessons had never taken root. He had always been too slow, too clumsy, too afraid. Then he remembered the fire. Ember-Vane had given him the ability to channel flame. It was a clumsy gift, one he had barely tested, but it was a gift nonetheless. If he could create a spark, a burst of light and heat, he could bait the drake. Dragons and their kin were drawn to fire, to the promise of warmth in a dying world. Seren gathered a pile of dry brush and dead wood from the surrounding moor, piling it at the mouth of the cave. His hands shook as he worked, and he had to stop twice to wipe the sweat from his brow. The throb in his chest was almost unbearable now, a constant drum that drowned out all other thought. He held out his hand, palm open, and concentrated. He thought of Ember-Vane's eye, the ember that never died. He thought of the spark that had ignited in his own chest when he accepted the pact. He thought of the warmth of the hearth in the village of Ash, the only comfort he had ever known. A flame flickered at his fingertips, small and uncertain, like a candle in a storm. He fed it, willing it to grow, to spread. It caught the brush with a hungry crackle, and soon the mouth of the cave was a roaring blaze, smoke billowing into the sky. Seren stepped back, his heart pounding. He drew his broken sword and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. The fire crackled and spat, and the smoke curled upward, black and oily. Seren began to think the drake was too deep, too buried to notice. But then he heard it, a low, guttural growl that shook the ground beneath his feet. The sound grew louder, closer, until the very stones at the cave's mouth began to tremble. And then the drake emerged. It was smaller than he had imagined, barely the size of a horse, but its body was a twisted mass of scales and bone, its wings tattered and useless. Its eyes were twin pits of molten hate, and its jaws dripped with black ichor. It moved with a sinuous, unnatural grace, its claws scoring deep grooves in the stone. Seren held his ground, his sword raised. The drake paused at the edge of the fire, its nostrils flaring as it tasted the air. Then it lunged. Seren dove to the side, rolling across the rocky ground. The drake's claws raked the earth where he had stood, sending a shower of stones into the air. He scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering, and ran. He had a plan, a desperate, foolish plan, but it required the drake to follow him. He led it along the edge of the ley line, weaving between the dead trees and jagged rocks. The drake was fast, faster than he had expected, and he could feel its hot breath on his neck. He ducked behind a boulder, and the drake's claws gouged the stone, sending splinters flying. Seren's eyes darted around, searching for the weak point. He had seen it from the ridge, a section of the cave's roof that was cracked and unstable, held up by a single pillar of rock. If he could lure the drake beneath it, and if he could bring the pillar down, the cave would collapse and crush the creature. But how? The answer came to him in a flash of desperate inspiration. The fire. He had left it burning at the cave's mouth, and the smoke was thick and black. If he could somehow direct the drake back toward the cave, and if he could channel enough flame to weaken the pillar. It was a gamble, a fool's gamble, but it was the only chance he had. Seren turned and ran back toward the cave, the drake snapping at his heels. He could feel its hunger, its rage, a palpable force that pushed him forward. He burst through the fire, the flames licking at his clothes, and dove into the cave's mouth. The drake followed without hesitation, its roar echoing off the walls. Inside, the cave was a labyrinth of twisting passages and jagged stalactites. Seren ran blindly, trusting the throb in his chest to guide him. He could hear the drake behind him, its claws scrabbling on the stone, its breath a hot, fetid wind. He found the pillar at the heart of the cave, a massive column of rock, cracked and leaning, supporting the weight of the entire ceiling. He stopped, turned, and faced the drake. "Come and get me," he snarled, and raised his hand. He channeled every ounce of flame he had, pouring it into the pillar. The fire licked the cracks, spread along the fissures, and with a deafening crack, the pillar began to give way. The ceiling groaned, and stones began to fall. The drake lunged, but it was too late. The world came crashing down in a thunder of rock and dust, and Seren threw himself aside, curling into a ball as the cave collapsed around him. When the dust settled, there was silence. Seren lay in the darkness, his body aching, his ears ringing. He coughed, tasting grit and blood. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself to his feet. The cave was gone, replaced by a pile of rubble. And beneath it, crushed and still, lay the drake. He crawled toward it, his hands raw and bleeding. He could feel the essence now, a warm, pulsing light that seeped from the creature's broken body. It called to him, beckoned him, and he answered. He placed his hands on the drake's scales and let the magic flow. It was like drinking fire. The essence surged into him, burning through his veins, filling every hollow space. He felt stronger, faster, more alive. The road to Ash was a wound in the earth, cracked and dry, lined with the skeletal fingers of dead trees. Seren walked it with the weight of the drake's essence still burning in his chest, a stolen fire that warmed his blood but left a cold, gnawing ache where his bond with Ember-Vane pulsed like a second heartbeat. The dragon was silent now, coiled somewhere deep in the recesses of their shared mind, but Seren felt him there, a presence thinned by the cost of their victory. The sun hung low and pallid, a coin of tarnished gold, when the first familiar rooftops appeared through the haze. Ash was a village of grey timber and soot-stained stone, built on the bones of an older settlement that had burned in the age of fading. Seren had left it 3 months ago, a failed squire with no spark, trailing shame like a cloak. He returned with a dragon's fire in his veins and a dead man's burden on his shoulders. The fields should have been green with early barley. Instead, they stretched in brown, brittle patches, the stalks bent and blackened at the roots. A blight, the kind that had been creeping across the kingdom for years, had settled here with a vengeance. The air smelled of rot and dust, and the only sound was the dry rustle of wind through withered leaves. Seren's boots crunched on the cracked earth as he passed the first farmstead. A woman stood at the fence, her face hollow, her hands stained with soil that yielded nothing. She looked up as he approached, and her eyes widened, not with recognition, but with something like fear. He had changed. His squire's tunic was gone, replaced by a traveler's cloak of rough wool, and his hands bore the faint, iridescent shimmer of dragon essence, like oil on water. Seren. The voice came from behind him, cracked and uncertain. He turned to see old Marta, the village healer, leaning on her gnarled staff. Her face was a map of worry, deeper lines carved by the season's failures. "You've come back." "I have," he said, and the words felt strange on his tongue. He had no home here, not truly. But the bond pulled him back, as if the village itself were a ley line, faintly humming with the memory of magic. Marta's gaze dropped to his hands, then to the faint glow at his collar where the essence lingered. "You found something," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Something old." Seren did not answer. He could feel the blight now, a sickness in the earth, a throttling of the world's breath. And beneath it, fainter than a heartbeat, the pulse of a dying ley line. It ran through the village like a buried artery, and it was starving. "The crops," he said, not a question. Marta nodded, her eyes glistening. 3 weeks since the last rain. The roots are black. We've tried everything, offerings, prayers, even digging for water. Nothing works. The children are weakening. Seren closed his eyes. The drake's essence stirred within him, a coil of fire and hunger. He had absorbed it to grow stronger, to protect Ember-Vane from the Inquisition. But the power was not his alone. It was a debt to the world, a promise made by the last dragon to restore what the fading had stolen. He walked to the center of the village, where the old well stood, its stones cracked and dry. The ley line ran beneath it, a thread of silver in the darkness of the earth. He could see it now, with the sight granted by the pact, a fragile filament, flickering like a dying candle. "What are you doing?" Marta asked, following him. Others had gathered, drawn by the strange light that now pulsed around Seren's hands. They watched with a mixture of hope and dread, their faces gaunt, their eyes hungry. Seren knelt, pressing his palm to the cracked earth. The essence surged, responding to his will. He had only a small measure of it, a fraction of the drake's power, but it was enough, if he spent it all, if he gave everything he had gained. Ember-Vane's voice came to him, thin and tired, like a whisper from a great distance. "You would give it back." "It was never mine," Seren said, and he meant it. The power had been borrowed, stolen from a creature of the old world. It was meant to flow, to nourish, to restore. And here, in this dying village, it was needed more than in his veins. He pushed. The essence poured from him like water from a cracked vessel, streaming into the earth, seeking the ley line. For a moment, nothing happened. The villagers held their breath, and Seren felt the world teeter on the edge of failure. Then the earth shuddered. A faint glow spread from his palm, creeping outward in veins of silver and gold. The blight recoiled, black roots withering as the magic touched them. The ley line pulsed, once, twice, and then it sang, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in the bones of everyone present. A shoot of green burst from the soil at Seren's feet, then another, then a dozen. The villagers gasped, stumbling back as the ground erupted with life. Barley stalks rose, thick and tall, their heads heavy with grain. The air filled with the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers, and the pallid sun seemed to brighten, as if the world itself had drawn a deep breath. The harvest was saved. Seren swayed, the strength draining from him. He felt hollow, scraped clean, the drake's essence gone. But the ley line hummed, and the village was alive again. The people stared at him, their faces shifting from disbelief to awe. A woman fell to her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. A man reached out, as if to touch the miracle, then drew back, afraid. "Saint," someone whispered. The word spread like fire through dry grass. "He saved us. He is a saint." Seren shook his head, but they did not see. They saw only the green fields, the living earth, the boy who had returned from the dead with fire in his hands. They did not see the cost, the dragon's blood coughed into the dust, the bond that frayed with every gift. Marta came to him, her hand on his shoulder. "You have given us everything," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "We owe you our lives." "You owe me nothing," Seren said, but his voice was a rasp. He looked at the fields, the life he had restored, and felt the weight of it settle on him like a stone. This was what the pact demanded, not just the killing, but the giving. Each gift drained Ember-Vane further, and the world drank deep. He turned away from the villagers, walking toward the edge of the village, where the land sloped down into a valley of shadows. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. He could feel the next hunt already, a distant thrum of corruption, a Wyrm's hunger. Ember-Vane's voice came to him, soft and sorrowful, like a bell tolling in a forgotten chapel. The next one is a Wyrm. It will not be so easy. Seren nodded, his fists clenched. The village was saved, but the world was still dying. And every step he took toward saving it brought him closer to losing the only friend he had left. Behind him, the villagers sang hymns to the new saint. Ahead, the shadows deepened, and the Wyrm stirred in its lair. Seren walked on. The sunken temple lay like a wound in the earth, its broken pillars jutting from the soil like the ribs of a long-dead beast. Seren stood at the edge, the weight of his oath pressing down on his shoulders. Behind him, the village of Ash was a memory of warm hearths and grateful eyes, but ahead, the darkness breathed. Ember-Vane's voice, a whisper of smoke and old embers, curled through his mind. The Wyrm nests below. It devours light, Seren. Be swift, be silent, or be its meal. Seren nodded, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his worn blade. He had no spark, no magic of his own, but the flame of Ember-Vane flickered in his chest, a borrowed warmth that demanded payment. He descended, each step crunching on ancient stone, the air growing colder and thicker with the scent of damp earth and something older, something hungry. The temple opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost to shadow. At its center, a pool of black water reflected nothing, not even the faint glow of the phosphorescent moss that clung to the walls. And there, coiled around a shattered altar, was the Wyrm. It was a horror of scales and sinew, its body as thick as a wagon, its head a wedge of bone and teeth. Its eyes were not eyes but voids, pits of absolute darkness that seemed to drink the very light from the air. As Seren watched, the Wyrm's head turned, and the darkness around it deepened, the moss dimming as if the beast were a hole in the world. Seren's heart hammered. He had faced the drake, but this was something else. The drake had been a beast of fire and fury, this was a creature of absence, a hunger made flesh. Ember-Vane, he whispered, his voice a ragged breath. How do I kill something that eats light? The dragon's answer was a pulse of warmth, a surge of flame that licked up Seren's arms. You do not fight the dark with a sword, boy. You fight it with fire. My fire. Let it fill you, let it burn through you, and strike when the beast is blinded. Seren felt the heat build in his chest, a searing pressure that made him gasp. He raised his hands, and flames erupted from his palms, not the controlled bursts he had managed before, but a torrent of living fire that roared into the chamber. The Wyrm recoiled, its void eyes narrowing, and for a moment, the darkness wavered. But the beast was fast. It lunged, jaws gaping, and Seren threw himself aside, the flames dying as he hit the cold stone. The Wyrm's tail whipped, catching him across the ribs, and he felt something crack. Pain lanced through him, but he scrambled to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Again, Ember-Vane urged, his voice strained. You must blind it, Seren. You must. The dragon's words cut off with a sharp, pained hiss. Seren felt a tug in his chest, a draining sensation, and he knew Ember-Vane was paying for every spark of flame he channeled. No, Seren growled, pushing himself up. I won't let you die for this. He focused, drawing on the essence he had absorbed from the drake, the last dregs of that stolen power. He felt it mingle with Ember-Vane's flame, a volatile mixture that burned like a fever. He raised his hands again, and this time, the fire was not a torrent but a focused lance of white-hot light, so bright that the chamber seemed to shrink from it. The Wyrm screamed, a sound that was less a cry and more a shattering of silence, and its void eyes squeezed shut, darkness bleeding from them like smoke. It thrashed, its coils tearing through the ancient stone, and Seren seized the moment. He ran, his boots sliding on the wet floor, and leaped. The Wyrm's heart was a pulsing mass of corrupted flesh, visible through a gap in its scales, and Seren drove his blade deep into it. The beast convulsed, a final, shuddering spasm, and then it stilled. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the Wyrm's body began to dissolve, its essence rising like a mist, drawn to Seren as if by a hook in his soul. He felt it enter him, a cold, dark power that fought against the warmth of Ember-Vane's flame. It was like swallowing ice and fire at once, and he staggered, dropping to his knees. The essence surged through him, and he felt something inside him shift, a new strength coiling in his limbs. But then came the cost. A sharp, agonizing crack echoed through the chamber, and Seren turned to see Ember-Vane, who had manifested beside him, his great wing bent at an unnatural angle, a fissure running through the membrane like a crack in a frozen lake. "No," Seren breathed, reaching out. "Ember-Vane. It is the price," the dragon said, his voice weak but steady. "Each essence you consume, a piece of me. I knew this when I chose you." Seren's chest ached, not from the Wyrm's blow, but from a grief too vast to name. He had saved the village, gained power, but each victory was a step toward the abyss, a step closer to the day when Ember-Vane would be nothing but a memory. He did not have time to mourn. A sound echoed from the temple's entrance, the clatter of hooves on stone, the jingle of armor. Seren looked up, his hand still on his blade, and saw a figure silhouetted against the pale light of the surface. A rider on a black horse, clad in silver armor that gleamed with an unholy light. The hood fell back, revealing a face sharp as a blade, eyes burning with righteous fury. "Seren of Ash," the knight said, his voice cold and certain. "You are branded a heretic, a demon who consorts with the last of the cursed brood. By order of the Inquisition, Sir Kale, shall cleanse this world of your taint." Seren's blood ran cold. The Wyrm's essence still churned in his veins, and Ember-Vane's wing hung broken at his side. He had no strength for another battle, no flame left to burn. But the knight's hand was already on his sword, and the darkness of the temple seemed to close in around them like a shroud. The rider's blade sang as it left its sheath, a note of cold steel that cut through the temple's silence. Moonlight, thin and pale as a dying man's breath, caught the edge and threw a silver line across Seren's face. He stumbled backward, his boots scraping over the rubble of the Wyrm's corpse, the taste of its essence still bitter on his tongue. Sir Kale dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years of brutal training. His armor was not the polished plate of a tourney knight, but a patchwork of boiled leather and dark iron, scarred by countless hunts. A silver emblem, a flame impaled on a sword, glinted on his chest, the mark of the Inquisition. "You reek of dragon," Kale said, his voice low and even, like a prayer spoken over a grave. "The stench of a soul sold to the abyss." Seren's hand went to the dagger at his belt, but his fingers trembled. He had never killed a man. The Wyrm had been a beast, a thing of hunger and shadow. This man was different, a zealot with a righteous fire in his eyes that burned hotter than any flame Seren could summon. "I am no demon," Seren managed, his voice cracking. "The Wyrm was a threat. I ended it." "You consumed it," Kale corrected, taking a step forward. The ground seemed to shrink beneath his boots. "You drank its essence like a leech drinks blood. That is not the act of a savior. That is the act of a parasite, a heretic who twists the natural order." Ember-Vane stirred in the shadows behind Seren, a low growl rumbling from his throat. The dragon's wing was bent at an unnatural angle, the fracture from the Wyrm's death throes still weeping a thin ichor. He tried to rise, but a spasm of pain racked his frame, and he slumped back with a hiss. "Stay back," Seren whispered, not to Kale, but to Ember-Vane. He could feel the dragon's agony through the pact, a dull throb at the base of his skull, a weight in his chest. Every breath Ember-Vane took was a labor, and every moment Seren spent arguing was a moment the dragon suffered. Kale's lips curled into a sneer. "The beast is wounded. Good. It will make this easier." He lunged. Seren's new agility, bought with the Wyrm's essence, saved his life. He twisted aside, feeling the wind of the blade pass inches from his cheek. The motion was clumsy, unrefined, but it was enough. He stumbled over a fallen pillar, landing hard on his shoulder, the impact jarring his teeth. Kale pressed the advantage, his sword arcing down in a brutal overhead strike. Seren rolled, the blade biting into the stone where his head had been, sending sparks skittering across the floor. He scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. "You cannot run forever," Kale said, advancing. "The Inquisition has hunted worse than you." Seren's eyes darted to the temple's shattered entrance, where the night sky hung like a black shroud. He could flee into the wilderness, lose himself in the blighted forests, but Ember-Vane could barely move. The dragon was a massive target, a crippled beacon in the dark. "Ember-Vane!" Seren called out, not knowing what he asked for. The dragon raised his head, his eyes, one the color of dying embers, the other a milky white from an old wound, fixed on Seren. A growl rumbled in his chest, and then a gout of flame, weak and sputtering, burst from his jaws. It was not enough to harm Kale, but it was enough to force the knight to step back, shielding his face with his gauntlet. "Flee!" Ember-Vane roared, his voice cracking. "I will hold him." "No!" Seren shouted, but the dragon's tail lashed out, catching him in the chest and sending him sprawling through the temple's broken archway. He tumbled down the rocky slope outside, scraping his palms and knees, the cold night air biting at his skin. He looked back just in time to see Kale's blade plunge into Ember-Vane's shoulder. The dragon let out a pained roar, a sound that tore through Seren's chest like a hook. The pact flared, and Seren felt the wound as if it were his own, a searing, white-hot agony that dropped him to his knees. "Ember-Vane," he screamed, his voice raw with desperation. The dragon's eyes met his, and Seren saw something there, not fear, but a fierce, ancient pride. "Go, boy. I will find you. I always do." Kale yanked his blade free, blood steaming in the cold air. He turned toward Seren, his face a mask of cold determination. "The beast will die slowly. And you, boy, will watch." But Seren was already moving. The Wyrm's essence sang in his veins, lending speed to his tired legs. He sprinted into the tree-line, branches whipping at his face, roots trying to trip him. Behind him, he heard Kale's horse snort and the jingle of armor as the knight mounted to give chase. For hours, Seren ran. He crashed through undergrowth, waded through icy streams, and scrambled up rocky hillsides, always pushing forward, always listening for the thunder of hooves. The sounds of pursuit faded and swelled, a constant, maddening rhythm. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed, but the essence kept him going, a fire in his blood that refused to die. At last, as the first gray light of dawn bled over the horizon, he collapsed in a hollow beneath a gnarled oak. His body was a tapestry of bruises and cuts, his clothes torn and filthy. He lay there, gasping, listening to the silence. No hooves. No jingle of armor. He had lost him. But the cost. He closed his eyes and reached for the pact, feeling the tether that bound him to Ember-Vane. It was frayed, weak, pulsing with pain. The dragon was still alive, but barely. Each essence Seren consumed was a knife in Ember-Vane's heart, and now, wounded by Kale's blade, the dragon was slipping away. "I'm sorry," Seren whispered into the cold earth. "I'm so sorry." A faint warmth stirred in his chest, a whisper of presence, of ancient consciousness. Ember-Vane's voice, thin as a thread of smoke, curled through his mind. "Do not mourn, boy. This is the price of our pact. I knew it when I chose you." "I can't lose you," Seren said, his voice breaking. "You're all I have." "Then grow stronger," Ember-Vane said. "There is another. A hydra, nested in the swamps to the east. It is guarded by a cult of corrupted worshippers who feed at the blood of innocents. If you consume its essence, you will have the strength to face Kale." Seren's eyes snapped open. "A hydra? But the cost?" "Will be my life," Ember-Vane finished, his voice heavy with resignation. "But if you do not, I will die anyway, and the world will fade into darkness. There is no other path." Seren lay in the hollow, staring at the lightning sky. The birds were beginning to sing, oblivious to the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. He thought of the villagers he had saved, their grateful faces, their whispered prayers. He thought of Kale's cold eyes, and the blade that had pierced his friend. He pushed himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. East. The swamps. A hydra. He took a step, then another, leaving a trail of blood and tears in the morning dew. Behind him, the sun rose, indifferent and beautiful, over a world that was dying. The swamp breathed. It was not a sound, but a slow, wet exhalation that rose from the black water and clung to Seren's skin like a second coat. He stood at the edge of a reed-choked channel, the mud sucking at his boots, and watched the torches of the cult flicker between the cypress trunks. Their light was the color of old blood, and it painted the hanging moss in shades of rust. Ember-Vane's voice came to him as a whisper of smoke in his mind. "They call themselves the faith of the festering scale. They believe the Hydra is a god, and they feed it the land's last vitality." Seren's fingers tightened on the hilt of his short blade, the only weapon he had left after Kale's ambush. He could feel the dragon's weakness through their bond, a dull ache in his own chest where the blade had bitten. "And if I just walk in? They will see the mark of my pact upon your skin. They will see a rival. You must become something else." Seren looked down at his hands. The faint lines of Ember-Vane's sigil glowed beneath the grime, pulsing with a light that was both his and not his. He had no spark, no innate magic. All he had was the dragon's borrowed flame and a desperate need to protect the only being who had ever believed in him. He stripped off his cloak, revealing the rough-spun tunic of a farmer. He smeared mud across his face, darkened his hair with ash, and practiced a stoop that made him look smaller, weaker, more broken. Then he stepped into the water, wading toward the torchlight. The first of the faithful met him at the edge of the clearing. A woman with hollow eyes and a necklace of serpent fangs. She held a spear, but her grip was lax. "You seek the mother of many?" Seren bowed his head. "I have heard she grants strength to the faithful. My village is dying. The blight takes everything." It was not a lie. The blight had taken his village too, in a different way. The woman studied him, then nodded. "Come. The mother is hungry tonight." He followed her through the camp. The cultists moved like shadows, their whispers a constant murmur beneath the drone of insects. They wore robes of gray, stained with mud and something darker. At the center of the clearing, a pit had been carved into the earth, lined with stones that glistened with moisture. The smell of rot and copper rose from it, and Seren's stomach turned. "She is below," the woman said, pointing. "We offer her our prayers, and she returns the gift of poison. It spreads through the roots, killing the crops, but it also purifies the soil for those who know the right." Seren forced himself to look interested. "The poison spreads? Then the blight is not natural." "Nothing is natural anymore, child. The old magic dies, and the new grows in its place. The mother is the new." He kept his face blank, but inside, a cold fury kindled. These people were not just worshipping a monster, they were spreading the blight. They were starving the world to feed their god. And Ember-Vane, the last true dragon, was dying because of it. That night, Seren worked among them. He helped them drag offerings to the pit, dead goats, sacks of grain, once precious iron tools. He watched as they chanted, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that made his skin crawl. And he listened. He learned that the Hydra was chained in a cavern beneath the shrine, that it could not be harmed by fire or blade, but that its hearts, all 7 of them, were vulnerable to a single strike of cold iron, if one could get close enough. But there was more. The cultists spoke of a ritual, a great feeding that would bind the Hydra's power to their leader, a man they called the Warden of Scales. The ritual was to take place at the next new moon, when the stars aligned and the mother's power was at its peak. Seren knew he could not wait that long. Ember-Vane was fading. He could feel it in the way the dragon's breath came slower, in the way his own flame flickered when he called it. He began to sabotage. A rope cut here, a torch extinguished there. He whispered to the villagers who had been brought in as slaves, telling them where to hide when the chaos began. He fed them from his own hands, using the last of his supplies to make a thin stew, and they looked at him with a gratitude that cut deeper than any blade. "You are a saint," an old man whispered, his eyes wet. "The gods have sent you." Seren shook his head. "I am no one. Just a man who wants to see the sun rise again." On the 3rd night, the Warden of Scales called for the ritual. The cultists gathered around the pit, their torches held high, and the ground began to tremble. Chains rattled below. A low, many-throated growl rose from the depths, and the air grew thick with the smell of rot and venom. Seren slipped away from the crowd, moving toward the chains that held the pit's cover. He had loosened them earlier, but now he needed to break them entirely. He drew his blade, the only piece of cold iron he had, and began to saw at the links. "What are you doing?" The voice was sharp, female, and filled with suspicion. Seren turned to find the woman from the first night standing behind him, her spear leveled at his chest. "I am freeing the mother," he said, his voice steady. "She deserves to roam, not to be caged." The woman's eyes narrowed. "You are not one of us. You are the one they speak of, the dragons get." She lunged. Seren twisted, using his enhanced agility to sidestep, but the spear caught his shoulder, drawing blood. He gritted his teeth and slammed the hilt of his blade into her temple. She crumpled. But the damage was done. The cultists had heard the struggle. They turned, their faces twisted with rage, and the Warden of Scales began to chant, his voice rising above the chaos. Seren threw himself at the chains, hacking with all his strength. The iron links groaned, then snapped. The cover of the pit fell away, and the Hydra surged upward, a mass of scales and fangs, 7 heads riding in the torchlight, each one shrieking with a different voice. The cultists screamed. The Hydra struck, its heads lashing out, tearing through the faithful like wheat. In the chaos, Seren saw his chance. He darted forward, dodging the flailing heads, and drove his blade into the largest heart, just as the warden had described. The hydra roared. It was a sound that shook the swamp, that sent birds scattering from the trees. The creature turned, its many eyes fixing on Seren, and he knew that he had made a terrible mistake. He was not the hunter. He was the bait. Ember-Vane's voice came to him, weak and strained. Seren, I cannot. I cannot fight it. Not in this state. Seren's heart pounded. He looked at the hydra, at the 7 heads converging on him, and he felt the weight of his own mortality pressing down like a stone. He had only one option. He had to run. He turned and fled, the hydra's roar thundering behind him, the cult's screams fading into the night. He did not know where he was going, only that he had to find a way to survive. And in the back of his mind, a single thought burned like a coal: he had to find a way to kill the beast or Ember-Vane would die. But the hydra was faster than he was. Its head snapped at his heels, its claws gouging the mud, and Seren knew that he could not outrun it forever. He stumbled, fell, and rolled to his feet just as a massive head descended, jaws open wide. And then, in the darkness, a flash of silver light erupted from the trees. Sir Kale stepped into the clearing, his blade burning with holy fire, and his eyes locked onto Seren with a hatred that burned hotter than any flame. "Found you," he said. The swamp air was thick with the stench of rot and old blood. Seren's breath came in ragged gasps as he pressed his back against a half-sunken oak, the cold mud sucking at his boots. Before him, the hydra rose from the black water like a nightmare-given flesh, 7 heads weaving a crown of hunger, each eye a molten ember. Its scales were the color of drowned iron, slick with the cult's sacrificial oils, and where its necks met the bloated body, the wound Seren had carved with cold iron still wept pale ichor. He had no sword. His shoulder burned where the spear had pierced it, and the cultist's poison was already threading fire through his veins. But he had the vial, the one the warden had dropped in the chaos, filled with the sect's own venom, distilled from the hydra's shed fangs. The same poison they used to blight the fields, to starve the world into kneeling. Seren's hand closed around the glass. It was warm, almost alive. "You cannot fight it," Ember-Vane's voice came, thin as smoke, from somewhere deep in Seren's chest. I cannot even lift my wing." "I know." Seren's jaw tightened. "So I won't fight it. I'll burn it." He didn't wait for a reply. He broke from cover, splashing through the mire, and the hydra's head snapped toward him with a chorus of hisses. The central head lunged first, jaws wide enough to swallow a horse. Seren ducked, felt the wind of its passing, and slammed the vial into the beast's open mouth. The glass shattered. The poison, so potent it could curdle blood, met the hydra's own venom, and the reaction was immediate and violent. The head convulsed, its throat swelling, and with a wet, sickening sound, it burst. Black ichor sprayed across the swamp, and the head fell limp, trailing a severed neck that writhed like a cut serpent. The other 6 heads screamed. They turned on each other, snapping and tearing, driven mad by the pain and the scent of their own poison. Seren stumbled back, watching the hydra devour itself in a frenzy of misplaced rage. It was ugly, desperate, and it was the only chance he had. He grabbed a fallen branch, its end sharpened by the cult's own tools, and charged. The battle was not a dance. It was a butcher's work. Seren dodged and struck, using the branch as a spear to stab at the eyes, to gouge at the necks, to drive the cold iron shards he had tucked into his belt deep into the flesh behind the skulls. The hydra's heads bit and clawed, tearing his tunic, raking lines of fire across his back. He screamed, but he did not stop. One head fell. Then another. The swamp turned red and black beneath him. When the 6th head crashed into the water, Seren was on his knees, chest heaving, his left arm hanging limp at his side. The 7th head, the largest, the one with the warden's ritual scars carved into its brow, watched him with something that might have been intelligence. It did not attack. It simply stared. "I'm sorry," Seren whispered, and he drove the cold iron shard through its eye and into its brain. The hydra shuddered, a final, terrible tremor that shook the very ground, and then it collapsed, a mountain of meat and ruin sinking into the mire. Seren did not have time to mourn. He could feel it already, the essence, the lifeblood of the beast, pulsing in the air like a heartbeat. It was a pull, a hunger that was not his own but had become his, and he crawled forward, placing his bare hand on the hydra's steaming hide. The essence flowed into him. It was like swallowing fire. It burned through his veins, searing away the poison, knitting his wounds with cruel, hasty strength. Power flooded him, raw and vast, and for a moment, he felt like a god. The world sharpened. The swamp's sounds became a symphony. He could see the ripples of every insect, smell the rot of every leaf. And then the pain came. Ember-Vane screamed. It was not a sound of anger or fear. It was a sound of breaking. Seren whirled, and his heart stopped. The dragon lay at the edge of the clearing, where he had left him hidden in the reeds. But now he was not hidden. He was visible, and he was crumbling. His scales, once the color of dying embers, were flaking away like ash, revealing raw, bleeding flesh beneath. His great, ruined wing, the one Sir Kale's sword had shattered, hung at a wrong angle, and his eyes, those deep, ancient eyes, were dimming. No, 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 no. Seren ran, stumbling, falling, crawling until he reached the dragon's side. He pressed his hands to Ember-Vane's neck, feeling the shallow, rattling breath. What did I do? What did I do? You grew, Ember-Vane said, his voice a whisper of wind through dead leaves. And I paid the price. That is the pact, little knight. That is the cost. Then I'll give it back. I'll find a way. There is no way. The dragon's head lifted, just an inch, and his gaze found Seren's. But you must not stop. The world needs its magic. It needs, you. No. I won't let you die for this. I won't. Seren's voice cracked. He gathered the dragon in his arms, heedless of the blood and the muck and the pain, and he began to walk. He did not know where. He only knew he had to move, had to find a healer, a sage, anyone who could undo this. He stumbled through the swamp, the dragon's weight a crushing burden, and the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pale gold and sickly green. The blight was receding from the trees as they passed, the leaves regaining a faint, desperate green, but Seren did not see it. He saw only Ember-Vane's closed eyes, the ash still falling from his scales. He was sobbing when he heard the voice. You've done a terrible thing, boy. Seren froze. He turned, slowly, and there stood Sir Kale, the Inquisitor, his silver armor caked with swamp mud, his sword drawn but lowered. His face, usually a mask of righteous fury, was unreadable. Finish it, Seren said, his voice dead. I don't care anymore. But Sir Kale did not attack. He looked at the dragon in Seren's arms, at the ash on the ground, at the faint, dying pulse of light in Ember-Vane's chest. You love it, Kale said, not a question. Seren said nothing. Kale sheathed his sword. I came to kill you. I was certain you were a heretic, a demon, a blight upon the world. But I have seen what you did to the Hydra. I have seen the blight recede. And I see what your bond is doing to you both. He paused. There is a way to save it. Seren's head snapped up. What? There is a way, Kale repeated, his voice low. But it will cost you everything you have gained. And it will require you to trust me. Seren stared at him, the dragon's fading breath warm against his chest. The sun climbed higher, and the swamp began to stir with the sounds of a new day. And for the first time since he had bound himself to Ember-Vane, he did not know what to do. The hermit's hut leaned against the bones of a dead mountain, its walls woven from the roots of trees that had not borne leaves in a century. Seren stood in the doorway, the weight of Ember-Vane's silence pressing against his chest like a stone. Behind him, the dragon lay coiled in a hollow of moss and ash, his scales flaking like burnt parchment, his breath a shallow rasp that barely stirred the dust. You came, the hermit said. She was old, older than the mountain, older than the blight that had eaten the world's magic. Her eyes were milky, but they saw through him. You came to ask how to save him. Seren nodded, his throat tight. Sir Kale said you know the ritual. Kale. The hermit spat the name like a bitter seed. A zealot with a good cause and a cruel hand. He told you the truth, though. There is a way to break the pact. She lifted a scroll from a niche in the wall, its edges burned, its surface covered in glyphs that seemed to writhe in the dim light. The prophecy of the last dragon. It says, when the bond is forged in blood and fire, only a pure heart can sever it. The ritual requires the host to offer something precious, a memory, a dream, a piece of the soul, to the void that binds them. Seren's hand went to his chest, where the mark of the pact pulsed like a second heartbeat. What do I have to give? Not what. Whom? The hermit's voice dropped to a whisper. You must forget him. Every moment you have shared, his voice, his warmth, the way he looks at you as if you are the last star in a dying sky. All of it must be surrendered. Only then will the bond break, and he will be free. Seren stared at her. The silence stretched, filled only by the drip of water from a crack in the ceiling and the distant cry of a crow. No. No. The hermit tilted her head. You would let him die. I would rather die myself. That is not an option. The pact is not so kind. She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the stone. You are a failed squire, a boy with no spark. He chose you because you were empty, an empty vessel for his last hope. But now you are full. Full of him. To save him, you must empty yourself. Seren's fists clenched. There has to be another way. There is not. Then I refuse. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. You think your love is stronger than fate? The world is dying, boy. The magic you have restored is a candle against the dark. If you do not save him, you will have to kill him. And if you kill him, you will break the world. Seren did not look back. He walked out into the grey light, his boots crunching on dead leaves, and found Ember-Vane watching him with eyes like molten gold. She told you, the dragon said. His voice was a whisper, cracked like old leather. Seren knelt beside him, his hand resting on the dragon's snout. I won't do it. I won't forget you. You must. No. Ember-Vane let out a long, shuddering breath. The hermit was right. You must kill me to save the world. Seren's hand froze. The words hung in the air, heavier than the mountain above them. What? I have seen it in the flames, Seren. The prophecy is not about breaking the pact. It is about ending it. My life is the price of your power. Every essence you have consumed has drained me, and every drain has brought the world closer to dawn. But dawn cannot come without a sacrifice. Then let the world burn. Seren's voice cracked. I won't lose you. Ember-Vane closed his eyes. You already have. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of ash and distant rain. Seren felt the weight of the scroll in his pocket. The hermit had pressed it into his hand as he left, a final gift. He did not know why he had kept it. Perhaps because he could not bear to let go of even the smallest hope. He looked up at the sky, grey and endless, and made a choice that would haunt him forever. I will find another way, he said. Even if it means fighting the gods themselves. Ember-Vane did not answer. The dragon's breathing slowed, and Seren felt the pact pulse like a wound that would not heal. He pressed his forehead to the dragon's warm scales and wept, not for himself, but for the future he could not see. And in the distance, the hermit watched from her doorway, her fingers tracing the glyphs of a prophecy that had already come true. The mountain breathed. Not with wind, but with the slow, rasping exhale of something ancient and vast. Seren stood at the mouth of the cavern, Ember-Vane's heat a faint warmth against his back, and stared into the darkness where the primordial drake slumbered. The air tasted of ash and ozone, and the ground beneath his boots was cracked, radiating a heat that had nothing to do with the sun. It knows we're here, Ember-Vane murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through Seren's bones. The dragon's wings, tattered and scarred, folded tighter against his flanks. It has been waiting. Seren nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. The pact thrummed in his chest, a second heartbeat, hungry and impatient. He could feel the drake's essence, a vast, molten reservoir of power, pulsing from the cavern's heart. It was more than any remnant he had faced. It was the source, the first of his kind, and consuming it would restore magic to the world. But it would also kill Ember-Vane. We don't have to do this, Seren said, not for the first time. We could turn back. Find another way. Ember-Vane's laugh was a dry, brittle sound. There is no other way, boy. The prophecy was clear. The pact is a chain, and only the final remnant can break it, or I can. He paused, his great head lowering until his eye, a dim ember, met Seren's. I chose this. I chose you. Do not let my choice be in vain. Seren's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to scream, to drag Ember-Vane away from this cursed mountain. But the drake stirred, and the ground shook. A low, grinding sound rolled through the cavern, and a wave of heat washed over them, carrying the stench of sulfur and ancient blood. It wakes, Ember-Vane said. Ready yourself. They moved forward together, Seren's boots crunching on the scorched stone, Ember-Vane's claws scraping deep grooves beside him. The cavern widened, and the darkness gave way to a crimson glow. And there, coiled in a nest of bones and molten rock, lay the drake. It was immense, a mountain of scaled muscle, its hide the color of dried blood, its horns twisted like ancient thorns. Its eyes, when they opened, were twin suns, burning with a fury older than empires. It rose, its neck unfurling like a serpent's, and let out a roar that shattered the stalactites above. Seren's heart hammered, but he did not flee. He drew his blade, and the flame channeled through him, licking along the steel. Ember-Vane, stay back. I'll draw its attention. No, Ember-Vane said, stepping in front of him. This is my kin. My burden. You will not face it alone. Before Seren could protest, the drake lunged. Its jaws, lined with teeth like broken swords, snapped toward them. Ember-Vane met it head-on, his own claws raking across the drake's snout, drawing a spray of black ichor. The drake shrieked, and its tail whipped around, catching Ember-Vane in the side. The dragon staggered, and Seren saw the wound, a deep gash that oozed a sickly green. No! Seren shouted, and he charged. He was not a knight. He had never been a knight. But the pact had given him speed, and he used it now, darting beneath the drake's belly, slashing at the softer scales. The drake roared, turning its massive head, and Seren barely rolled aside as a jet of flame erupted from its throat, scorching the ground where he had stood. He needed to get close. To touch it. To absorb its essence. But the drake was too fast, too powerful. Each time he neared, a claw or a tail sent him sprawling. Ember-Vane fought beside him, but the dragon was weakening, his movements growing sluggish, his breath a labored rasp. And then, from the cavern's entrance, a figure emerged. Sir Kale. The knight was armored in silver, his sword drawn, his eyes burning with zeal. The heretic and his beast, he said, his voice echoing. I knew you would come here. The final remnant, the source of all corruption. I will destroy it, and you with it. Seren's blood ran cold. Kale, this isn't the time. The drake will kill us all if we don't work together. Kale laughed. Work with you. You are a stain upon the world, Seren. You and your demon. But I am not so foolish as to face this beast alone. I will let it tire you, and then I will claim its power for the Inquisition. Before Seren could respond, Kale raised his hand, and a chain of light shot from his gauntlet, wrapping around the drake's neck. The beast roared, thrashing, but the chain held, crackling with holy energy. Kale pulled, and the drake stumbled, its head lowered. Now, Seren. Kale shouted. Strike it. Seren hesitated. Kale's betrayal was obvious, he wanted Seren to weaken the drake so he could steal the kill. But the drake was already wounded, and Ember-Vane was failing. If they didn't act now, they would all die. He made his choice. Seren sprinted forward, his blade aimed at the drake's heart. The beast saw him coming, and its eyes narrowed. It opened its jaws, and a torrent of fire erupted, but not at Seren. At Ember-Vane. The dragon was too weak to dodge. The flames engulfed him, and he let out a scream that tore through Seren's soul. Ember. Seren's world narrowed to a single point. He drove his blade into the drake's chest, feeling the resistance of scales, then the give of flesh. The drake roared, a deafening sound, and its claws raked across Seren's back, sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, his vision swimming, but he forced himself to his feet. The drake was dying. Its essence, a torrent of molten gold, poured from the wound, and Seren felt it calling to him. The pact screamed, demanding he consume it. But Ember-Vane lay still, smoke rising from his scorched hide. Kale moved. He strode past Seren, his sword raised, a triumphant glint in his eye. The power is mine, he said, and he plunged his blade into the drake's skull. The beast convulsed, and its essence began to flow into Kale. But the power was too much. Kale screamed, his body twisting, his armor cracking as the wild magic consumed him. He turned, his eyes now burning with the drake's fire, and lunged at Seren. Seren raised his blade, but he was too weak. Kale's sword clashed against his, and the force sent him to his knees. Kale loomed over him, his face a mask of agony and rage. You, Kale hissed. You did this. You and your beast. No, Seren said, and he channeled every last drop of flame into his blade. You did this to yourself. He struck. The blade, wreathed in fire, pierced Kale's chest. The knight's eyes widened, and he fell, the drake's essence dissipating into the air, lost. Seren staggered to Ember-Vane. The dragon's side was a charred ruin, and his breath was a shallow rattle. His eye, once a bright ember, was now a dim coal. "Ember," Seren whispered, cradling the great head. "Stay with me. Please." Ember-Vane's mouth moved, and a faint, warm breath brushed Seren's cheek. "Do it now," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "End it. Take my essence. Save the world." Seren's tears fell onto the dragon's scales. "No. I won't. I can't." "You must," Ember-Vane said. "It is the only way. The pact, it is a chain. Break it. Let me go." Seren looked at the dying dragon, his only friend, the one who had chosen him when the world had cast him aside. And he knew, with a certainty that shattered his heart, that Ember-Vane was right. But he could not bring himself to do it. The cavern had grown cold, colder than the dead mountain's bones. Seren knelt beside Ember-Vane, the dagger in his hand trembling with a weight that had nothing to do with steel. The dragon's chest rose and fell in shallow, rattling breaths, each exhale carrying a wisp of smoke that curled upward and vanished into the darkness above. The last light of the drake's dying fire had faded, leaving only the faint, sickly glow of Seren's own wound, a gash across his ribs that wept blood in a slow, steady rhythm. "Do it," Ember-Vane said, his voice a whisper of grinding stone. The great eye, once a molten gold, now filmed with grey, fixed on Seren with an unreadable tenderness. "Take what I have left. End this pact." Seren's grip tightened on the hilt. The dagger was a simple thing, iron, unadorned, taken from a dead inquisitor's belt. It had never been meant for this. But the words of the pact burned in his mind, etched there by the first touch of dragonfire, * to consume is to become. To become is to lose, * he had consumed the drake's essence, felt it surge through his veins like liquid sun, and with it, he had felt Ember-Vane's life flicker like a candle in a storm. "No," Seren said, his voice cracking. "There has to be another way. There is no other way." Ember-Vane's head lifted, a slow, painful motion that sent tremors through his fractured wings. "The world is dying, Seren. The ley lines are empty. I have felt them withering for centuries, and now you hold the last ember. If you keep it, it will smolder and die with me. If you release it, it will spread like wildfire, rekindling what the blight has choked." Seren looked down at his own hands. They were scarred now, crisscrossed with burns and cuts, the hands of a failed squire who had never held a sword with grace. But they had held the essence of a primordial drake. They had channeled flame. They had saved a village, killed a monster, and watched a zealot die from his own greed. And now they were being asked to do the one thing that would break him. "I can't," he whispered. "You're all I have left." Ember-Vane let out a sound that might have been a laugh, if dragons could laugh. It was a dry, rattling cough that sent a puff of ash into the air. "You have more than me, boy. You have the world. And the world needs you to be more than a failed knight with a dragon's shadow." The dragon's eye closed, then opened again, a spark of defiance in the grey. "Listen to me, Seren. The pact was never about me. It was about you. You were chosen because you were empty, a vessel with no spark, no magic, no hope. But emptiness can be filled. And what you carry now is not just my essence, or the drake's. It is the last will of every dragon that ever flew. You must let it go, so that it can return to the world." Seren's vision blurred. He thought of the villagers of Ash, their faces lifted to the sky as he called down flame to burn away the blight. He thought of Sir Kale, twisted by the very power he had coveted, dying with a scream that still echoed in Seren's dreams. And he thought of Ember-Vane, the crippled, broken dragon who had chosen him, a nobody, to carry the weight of a dying world. "What happens to you?" Seren asked, his voice barely a breath. Ember-Vane's tail curled, a weak, almost affectionate gesture. "I become what I always was, in the end. A memory. A song. A warmth in the stone. But you will carry me. Not as a burden, but as a flame. And when you stand in the light of the new dawn, you will know that I am there, in the wind, in the earth, in the fire you command." The dragon's head lowered, resting on the cold stone. "Do it now, Seren. While I still have breath to give you my blessing." Seren's hand shook. The dagger seemed to grow heavier, as if the world itself was pressing down on it. He thought of all the ways he could refuse, could run, could hide, could let the darkness take the world. But he had seen the blight. He had seen children with hollow eyes and crops blackened to ash. He had seen what happened when hope was allowed to die. He pressed the dagger to Ember-Vane's chest, just above the heart. The dragon did not flinch. Instead, a low, resonant hum filled the cavern, a sound that seemed to come from the stone itself. Seren felt the pact thrumming in his blood, a golden thread that bound him to this creature, this last of his kind. "I'm sorry," Seren said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "Don't be," Ember-Vane replied. "Be brave." Seren closed his eyes. He thought of the first time he had seen Ember-Vane, a broken thing huddled in a cave, wings torn, scales dull. He thought of the first time he had channeled flame, the shock of it, the terror, the wonder. And he thought of the oath he had made, not to a king or a code, but to a dragon who had trusted him with everything. He pushed the dagger in. It was not a violent act. The blade slid through scales and flesh like a whisper, and Ember-Vane let out a single, soft breath, not a cry of pain, but a sigh of release. Seren felt the essence surge through the blade, into his hand, up his arm, into his chest. It was not the burning fire of the drake. It was a gentle warmth, like a hearth on a winter night, like a mother's hand on a fevered brow. And then Ember-Vane began to dissolve. It started at the edges, the tips of his wings turning to motes of golden light that drifted upward like fireflies. The light spread, consuming scales, bones, the great heart that had beat for centuries. Seren watched, his hand still on the dagger, as the dragon's body became a pillar of light, rising toward the cavern roof. The light did not burn. It illuminated, casting away shadows that had clung to the stone for ages. "Remember," Ember-Vane's voice came, not from the dissolving form, but from inside Seren's own mind. "You are not alone. You never were." And then the light burst outward, a shockwave of warmth that passed through Seren like a breath. It did not stop at the cavern walls. It spread, through the mountain, through the earth, into the ley lines that threaded the world like veins. Seren felt them light up, one by one, a network of golden threads that had been dark for centuries, now blazing with renewed life. The dagger fell from his hand, clattering on the stone. He was on his knees, his chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. The cavern was empty now, save for the fading glow of the light and the whisper of a wind that had no source. And yet, Seren felt something new, a warmth in his chest, not just the power of the essence, but a presence. A familiar presence, like a hand on his shoulder. He looked up. Through a crack in the cavern roof, he saw the sky. It was no longer the gray, sickly pallor of the dying age. It was a deep, burning orange, the color of a sunrise that had not been seen in generations. The light poured down, painting the stone in hues of gold and rose, and Seren felt the warmth seep into his bones. He stood, slowly, his legs trembling. The wound on his side had closed, leaving only a pale scar. He walked to the cavern entrance, stepping out onto the mountainside. The air was clean, sharp, alive. Below, the valley spread out, a patchwork of green fields and silver rivers, the blight receding like a tide. And then, from the distance, came a sound that stopped his heart. A roar. Not the cry of a beast in pain, but the call of a creature new to the world. It was high and clear, like a bell struck at dawn, and it echoed across the mountains, across the valleys, across the sky itself. Seren felt the warmth in his chest flare, and he knew, with a certainty that transcended thought, that somewhere in the restored wilds, a dragon had been born. He smiled, a broken, tear-streaked smile, and whispered to the wind, "Thank you." The sun crested the horizon, and the world was reborn. The cavern mouth exhaled a breath of warm ash as Seren stepped into the open. The world he had known, gray, choking, dying, was gone. In its place, a sky of pale gold and rose stretched above him, the first true dawn he had ever seen. The air tasted of rain and green things, of soil waking after a long sleep. The blight that had clung to the valley like a shroud had receded, leaving behind a landscape raw and new, as if the earth itself had been reborn. He stood there, his boots sinking into the soft, dark loam, and let the light wash over him. The wound in his side, the one that had burned with Ember-Vane's dying fire, was sealed, a smooth, pale scar, warm to the touch. He pressed his palm against it and felt the echo of a heartbeat, not his own, but familiar. Ember-Vane was gone, dissolved into light and ley lines, and yet, something lingered. A warmth that pulsed beneath his ribs, a whisper of flame in his blood. He walked forward, drawn by an instinct he couldn't name. The ground before him was littered with the remnants of the cavern's collapse, stones blackened by dragonfire, shards of obsidian, and a fine layer of ash that swirled around his ankles. And there, nestled in the hollow of a broken boulder, something moved. A small, wet sound. A chirp, almost. Seren's breath caught. He knelt, his knees pressing into the ash, and parted the soot-streaked debris. Beneath it, curled in a tight spiral, was a hatchling. Its scales were the color of dying embers, deep crimson fading to orange at the edges, with a faint, pulsing glow along its spine. Its wings were crumpled, wet with the remnants of a shell that had already crumbled to dust. It was no larger than a cat, and its eyes, when they opened, were molten gold. The hatchling blinked at him, and Seren felt his heart crack open. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and the creature nuzzled against his palm. The warmth of it was unmistakable, the same warmth that had filled the cavern when Ember-Vane had dissolved. The same presence that had wrapped around him in the dark, promising strength and doom in equal measure. "No," he whispered, his voice cracked and raw. "You can't be." But he knew it was true. The essence he had released into the world had not vanished. It had gathered, coalesced, and taken form. Ember-Vane was reborn, not as the crippled, dying dragon he had been, but as this small, fragile thing, mewling for warmth and safety. Seren gathered the hatchling into his arms, cradling it against his chest. The creature's scales were cool at first, then warmed to match his own body heat. It made a soft, contented sound and nestled into the crook of his elbow, its tail curling around his wrist. "You fool," Seren murmured, his voice thick with unshed tears. "You absolute fool. You gave everything, and now you're back. As this?" He laughed, a broken, ragged sound that echoed across the empty valley. The hatchling chirped in response, and Seren felt a sob catch in his throat. He had spent so long believing that Ember-Vane's death was the end, that the price of saving the world was losing the only being who had ever seen him as more than a failure. But here, in the ash and the dawn, the dragon had returned to him. "I'll protect you," Seren said, his voice steadying. He pressed his lips to the hatchling's forehead, feeling the faint pulse of magic beneath its scales. "Not as a weapon. Not as a tool. As a friend. As family." The hatchling yawned, showing a tiny row of needle-sharp teeth, and Seren smiled, a real smile, the first in what felt like years. He turned to leave, to carry the hatchling to safety, when a sound stopped him. A groan, low and pained, from the edge of the clearing. Seren tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the dagger at his belt, but the hatchling in his arms made no move to flee. Instead, it raised its head, ears pricked, and let out a questioning trill. Seren stepped forward cautiously, his boots crunching on the ash. And there, half buried beneath a fallen slab of stone, was Sir Kale. The Inquisitor was a wreck. His silver armor was cracked and blackened, his left arm bent at an unnatural angle, and his face was a mask of blood and grime. His sword lay a few feet away, snapped in two. He looked up as Seren approached, and his eyes, once bright with zealotry, were dull, hollow, and wet with tears. "Kill me," Kale rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've won. The dragon is dead. The world is saved. Just end it." Seren stood over him, the hatchling warm against his chest. He could feel the anger rising, the memory of every chase, every accusation, every moment Kale had hunted him like a beast. The man had branded him a heretic, a demon, a plague upon the land. He had tried to kill Ember-Vane. He had tried to kill Seren. But the anger was a distant thing now, like a fire that had burned itself out. Seren looked at Kale, broken, beaten, stripped of everything he had believed in, and saw not an enemy, but a man who had lost his way. "No," Seren said quietly. Kale blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "What? I won't kill you." Seren knelt, setting the hatchling down gently in a patch of soft moss. He reached out and took Kale's good hand, pulling him upright. The Inquisitor winced, but did not resist. "You were wrong about me. About the dragon. But you were trying to protect people, in your own way. That's not something to be punished with death." Kale stared at him, his mouth working silently. I tried to destroy you. I tried to kill the last dragon. And you failed," Seren said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "That's your punishment. To live with it. To see what you almost destroyed." He gestured at the valley below, the green hills, the clear sky, the distant sparkle of a river that had been dry for a generation. "Look at this, Kale. This is what magic can do. Not to destroy, but to heal. To restore. You spent your life hunting what you feared, and you never once stopped to ask if it might have been worth saving. Kale's gaze drifted to the hatchling, which was now tottering toward him on unsteady legs, sniffing at the air. The creature paused, tilted its head, and let out a small, inquisitive chirp. Kale's breath hitched, and a tear traced a clean line through the grime on his cheek. I don't know how to live with this, he admitted, his voice breaking. Then learn, Seren said. Start by helping me. There's a village not far from here, Ash, they call it. They need food, shelter, protection. You can use that armor of yours for something other than hunting. Kale looked at him, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Then, slowly, painfully, the Inquisitor nodded. I'll try, he said. Seren nodded, then scooped the hatchling back into his arms. It nuzzled against his neck, and he felt a warmth spread through him, not just from the creature, but from something deeper. A promise. A new beginning. He turned toward the horizon, where the sun was climbing higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Seren did not feel lost. He had a purpose. A friend. And a world worth protecting. He walked forward, and the dawn welcomed him. The world held its breath. Seren stood at the edge of the village, the hatchling curled in the crook of his arm, its scales the color of dying embers, save for the faint, golden light that pulsed beneath them, like a heart beating in time with the land. The blight had receded, leaving behind soil that smelled of rain and iron, and the air itself seemed to hum with a quiet, ancient song. Magic returned at last, not as a roaring flood but as a gentle tide, lapping at the roots of every blade of grass, threading through the veins of every sleeping creature. Seren watched the horizon, where the sky was a bruise of violet and rose, the first rays of the sun spilling over the distant mountains like molten gold. He had seen sunrises before, cold, gray things that promised nothing but another day of failure. This one felt different. It felt like an answer. The hatchling stirred, its tiny head lifting, nostrils flaring as it tasted the morning air. Ember-Vane. The name was a wound and a balm all at once. The great dragon, crippled and ancient, had given his life to save this world, and yet here he was, reborn, smaller than a lamb, his eyes still holding the same stubborn fire. Seren's throat tightened. He had sworn an oath once, in the ashes of his old life, to be a knight. He had failed. But this? This was a second chance, and he would not squander it. Behind him, the village of Ash stirred to life. Smoke curled from chimneys, thin and hopeful, and the smell of baking bread drifted on the wind. Children's laughter rang out from a doorway, and Seren felt a smile tug at his lips, a rare thing, these days. He turned to see Sir Kale leaning against a fence post, his armor dented and cracked, his face pale beneath the bandages wrapped around his chest. The zealot who had hunted him, who had called him a demon and a heretic, now looked at him with something like peace. Kale nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, and Seren returned it. There was no need for words between them. The silence was enough. The hatchling squirmed, and Seren set it down gently on the grass. It wobbled on unsteady legs, then took a few tentative steps, its claws leaving small impressions in the dew. Seren knelt, watching it explore, and for a moment the weight of everything, the Hydra's essence burning in his veins, the memory of Ember-Vane's sacrifice, the knowledge that every gift he had was bought with his friend's life, settled on his shoulders like a mantle of iron. He had consumed the Hydra's essence, and with it, the world had been restored. But what had it cost? He looked at the hatchling, and the answer was there, written in the fragile curve of its neck, the way it stumbled and righted itself with a stubbornness that was achingly familiar. Ember-Vane had given everything. And Seren had taken it. A shadow fell over him, and he looked up to see Kale approaching, his steps slow but steady. The knight's voice was rough, scraped raw by the fire of his own convictions. "You're thinking about it again," Kale said. "About the cost." Seren didn't answer. He didn't need to. Kale lowered himself to the ground beside him, wincing as his wounds protested. "I spent my life hunting things I didn't understand," he said, staring at the hatchling. "I called it faith. I called it duty. But it was fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "You're not a scourge, Seren. You're a guardian. I see it now." The hatchling chirped, a sound like a struck bell, and wobbled back to Seren, nuzzling against his knee. Seren reached down and stroked its head, feeling the warmth of its scales, the flutter of its tiny heart. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Every time I take a step forward, I feel like I'm losing something. Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, that's what it means to be a guardian. You give. You sacrifice. You keep going even when it hurts. He looked at Seren, and there was no judgment in his eyes, only a weary understanding. You're not alone anymore. You have the hatchling. You have the village. You have me. Seren blinked, surprised by the offer. I thought you were going to kill me. I was, Kale said, a ghost of a smile crossing his lips. But then you saved me. And I realized that the world doesn't need more zealots. It needs people who are willing to stand in the ashes and build something new. The sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. The hatchling stretched its wings, tiny and translucent, catching the light. Seren watched it, and for the first time since the cavern, he felt something other than grief. He felt hope. He stood, brushing the dirt from his knees, and lifted the hatchling to his chest. I will never let the sky fade again, he said, the words of vow, spoken to the wind, to the land, to the tiny creature in his arms. I swear it. Kale rose, steadying himself on the fence post. Then let's get to work, he said. The village needs a new well. And I think I know where to find some good stone. They walked back toward the village, the hatchling nestled against Seren's chest, its eyes half closed in contentment. The world was still scarred, still fragile, but it was alive. And for now, that was enough. Seren let himself breathe, let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be the guardian the world needed. Then the shadow passed over the sun. It was brief, a flicker, a whisper of darkness that cut across the light and vanished. But Seren felt it. A coldness that had nothing to do with the morning chill, a weight that pressed against his chest like a hand. He looked up, but the sky was clear, a perfect blue. The hatchling stiffened in his arms, its tiny claws digging into his tunic, a low growl rumbling in its throat. Kale stopped, his hand going to the hilt of his sword. Did you feel that? He asked, his voice tight. Seren nodded, his eyes scanning the heavens. Something's coming, he said, and the words tasted like ash. Something new. The hatchling hissed, and far above, a cloud shifted, revealing a shape that was too large, too dark, too wrong to be a bird. It hung there for a moment, a blot against the sun, and then it was gone, leaving only the echo of its presence. Seren tightened his arms around the hatchling, feeling its warmth, its fragile life. The promise he had made moments ago rang in his ears, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would be tested sooner than he had hoped. But he would not break. He would not falter. He had sworn an oath, and he would keep it, no matter the cost. The sun rose, full and bright, and Seren stood in its light, a boy who had failed and been reborn, a knight without a sword, a guardian with a dragon in his arms. And in the distance, on the edge of the world, something stirred, awakening from a long, hungry sleep. The sky was fading again. But this time, Seren was ready to fight for it.